Hello, and welcome to Coffee with Jesus. I'm your host, Todd Uebele. When I used to work for GE, I had showed up to work one morning and there was a meeting notice or a meeting request in my inbox. It was from my boss's boss, and it included our human resources rep. And suddenly, I got this cold, sinking feeling deep in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't altogether unexpected. Rumors had abounded for months. Believe it or not, it started with coffee. About 6 to 8 months prior, they took away our coffee. We had these nice little machines, and we could just go and get coffee when we needed it. And then one day, they were gone. Apparently, coffee was too expensive for one of the original listed Dow companies, a Fortune 500 company. And all of a sudden, they couldn't afford coffee. But that was just the beginning. They cut down on travel dramatically. Only travel that was strictly necessary, and it had to be approved by your one over. And then they really clamped down on overtime for the engineers and for the craft, for the production crew. And then some of the contractors, or rather the subcontractors that we had, they just stopped showing up one by one. They were no longer there. And then I started offering early retirement to people. And then I started strongly encouraging early retirement. And one of my coworkers, by the end of this, it was told straight up, look, you can take early retirement, or he had been struggling for a while financially. They had purchased a company from Europe, and the deal was not as mm, lucrative, I guess. It did not work out the way they'd anticipated. I have to be a little careful how I say this, but the company that they had purchased was not as sound or solvent as they had presented themselves. And GE had actually lost hundreds of millions of dollars in this transaction. When the deal was finalized and that new company was part of GE had wound up losing hundreds of millions of dollars. And so they tried other ways to save. They tried everything they could think of. But eventually, that fateful day arrived. When I got that meeting notification from my boss's boss, the meeting was set for 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And I was actually set to be leaving early that day because I had to go to the airport. I was flying out that afternoon because I had an interview the next day. Well, as soon as my boss arrived, his little WebEx dot went green. I pinged him and said, hey, is there any way that we can meet earlier than 3 o'clock? I have to leave for the airport at 3 o'clock. And then I chimed in, and if this meeting is for what I think it is, I really have to be at the airport this afternoon. He was actually very gracious. Both my boss's boss and our HR rep actually gave up their lunch so that they could meet with me. However, that didn't really make it any easier. We had the meeting at lunch, and I was given my papers. I was given formal notification that I was being laid off. While it was not unexpected, while there had been rumors going on for months, and while I was trying to prepare for this eventuality, it still felt like a punch in the gut, folks. I mean, just the news that I was being laid off, so many things racing through my head. What happens now? How will I provide for my family? What am I going to do? I had an interview the next day, and I had to do my absolute best. I actually wound up leaving right after that meeting. I just took the whole afternoon off. And I had gone home and I told my wife, I told my kids, and then I told them, I said, okay, it's going to be all right. I have an interview tomorrow. Fingers crossed this interview goes well. But folks, I'm going to be honest with you, the next few weeks were just, I don't know, they were all blur. It was all just so crazy. There was the guilt and shame. There was the anxiety and the stress. just this flood of emotions and worries. It's really hard to explain. Things had actually worked out for me. The interview had gone really well. After about 2 weeks, I got my offer. And the way things worked out, the last day at GE was Friday, and I had started my new job that following Monday. So God was really, really looking out for me. Now, with that being said, there was still a lot that we had to do. I had to move my family halfway across the country, and this was very disruptive, for my wife, for my kids. We had all started putting down roots in our community. My kids had their activities and their friends. And this whole event, this whole being laid off and being forced to take a new job halfway across the country, it was a very, very trying period, folks. The time from when I got my layoff papers till when I got my new offer, there was literally nothing I could do but trust God. I mean, I had applied for hundreds of jobs. I used the shotgun approach, sending my resume out everywhere. But really, all I could do was trust God. And God took care of me, you know. God took care of my family. The move went really smooth. It was one of the smoothest moves we had ever had. My new job went really well. I was very much accepted there, and I was able to move up pretty quickly. And overall, things did work out. And folks, we have a saying in my family: sometimes rejection is protection. Sometimes it feels like we're being rejected, but that's actually God's way of protecting us. When I was laid off, I felt rejected. You know, I mean, logically, I knew it wasn't me, right? GE had laid off about 6,000 people. Two-thirds of my department was gone. And basically, the cutoff was, how senior were you? The more senior people were actually let go. The junior people were kept. The new grads were kept. But emotionally, it was a punch in the gut. I was being rejected by GE and by my bosses, and it was really tough. Just getting those papers, even though I could see it coming, even though rumors had been going on for months, even though I tried to prepare for it by applying for other jobs well in advance, it was still a punch in the gut. Now, I can say, folks, my coworkers and we all came together. Um, I had mentioned in the previous episode how sometimes God helps us through other people, right? Sometimes He intervenes directly, and sometimes He helps us through others. And that for us, there is no shame in us reaching out for the help that we need. And this was very apparent by all of my friends and my coworkers who had been laid off. I had to reach out to people for references. Some of them were just personal references for the new job, and some of them were security references that I needed for my security clearance. There were people who had reached out to me for help. The company that I was moving to, that I was starting with, they had a lot of openings for other engineers, and I was able to refer a lot of people. And so we all helped each other. We could be references for each other. We could network with each other. We could share openings with each other. We could pass our resume around with each other. And it was actually, if there was a silver lining in that cloud, that was it. Just the way that all of us who were being laid off came together to help each other. Now, you might be wondering, how is getting laid off protection? You know, as I've said, it was a punch in the gut, and I felt rejected. But that layoff, it was just the beginning for GE, ladies and gentlemen. And today, General Electric, GE as a company, one of the founding members of the Dow, a formerly Fortune 500 company, it no longer exists. It was broken up into multiple companies, and General Electric no longer exists as a company. My boss was demoted. My boss's boss was demoted. Our executive, he later reached out to me. Um, Things got really, really bad at GE as the company was shutting down. And the people who were left, actually had a much more difficult time of it than those of us who were laid off. I know it seems a little bit backwards to say that, but GE was in really, really bad shape. I mentioned the one deal that had not played out the way they had intended, but that wasn't the only one. The GE corporate leadership made a lot of decisions that were not very good. They tried to get into the oil business right as the oil business was crashing in Houston. They were behind on digital engineering. They were they just made a lot of decisions that didn't work out and that really hurt the company. And things went very far south, very badly, very quickly for GE. And so a lot of the people who had remained had a very difficult time of it. Whereas having been laid off right at the beginning, I was able to get that new job, land on my feet, and move ahead in my career. I would not have been able to do that had I remained at GE. Now, I'm going to be honest, folks. I didn't know all this while I was going through it. Getting that layoff notification, stressing about the new job, stressing about moving my family halfway across the country, about trying to establish ourselves in a new location. It was rough. It was a very rough period for me, for my wife, for my children. But looking back on it, I can see how things would have been so much worse if I had stayed at GE at the time. I still would have had to move. I still would have wound up losing my job, but it would have been several more months, maybe even another couple years of just real stressful life. And I realize to those people who are going through layoffs right now, to those people who are losing their jobs, this kind of thing can sound a little hollow. Because when you're going through something really difficult, it's almost impossible to see the other side. When you're going through that storm, it's really hard to see that sunlight that's on the other side. But that sunlight is there. And folks, when you're going through a very difficult period, God is with you and He will get you through. And in some cases, that difficult period is to get you to a better result. Sometimes you need that difficulty up front to get to a better result. Whereas staying where you are could make things even more difficult in the long run. And folks, this isn't the only time that this has happened to me. One time when I was working in Florida, I had an opportunity to work for Amazon. Yes, Amazon. And this seemed like a lock, folks. The hiring manager's boss was one of my college classmates. Position, it had my name written all over it. I was not just qualified, I was super qualified. And I know that sounds like bragging, but I mean, I literally met all of the requirements. I met everything they were looking for. And I actually had a conversation with my college classmate, and he had to kind of step back from the actual hiring process, but he was able to really coach me for the interview. Hey, look, this is what we're going to want to know. This is what we're going to ask. These are the kind of things we're looking for. And I aced that interview, folks. I talked to the hiring manager and I impressed the entire panel, and it was great. But I didn't get an offer. And at first, I was really upset because this was a really good job and it was Amazon. But I found out a few months later the contract that Amazon had been awarded that they were hiring me for had been canceled. Amazon had a contract with the Department of Defense, and I was going to be hired for that contract, only I didn't get the offer. And then a few months later, the Department of Defense, they canceled that contract altogether. And my college classmate, he wound up actually leaving Amazon as a result. And I just can't help but think, well, what would have happened if I had gotten that job, moved my family again, only to find out the contract was lost and I was going to be losing my job again? And folks, in that case, rejection was absolutely protection. In being rejected for that job, even though everything seemed to line up, God was protecting me and my family. So, folks, sometimes when it seems like things aren't going well, or it seems like we're struggling, or we're facing a trial. Sometimes through that trial, God is actually protecting us from something worse that could happen down the road, down the line. And sometimes God has something better for us in store. Before I close, I'd like to share one more quick story about Qatar. Shortly after I started the podcast, I received an offer that was too good to refuse. It was one of those too good to be true type of offers for a job in Qatar. And when I got to Qatar, I was told that the company that had hired me and brought me over there had lost the contract. And there was only a few months left before the contract was up. So once again, I was looking at being out of a job. And once again, I had to job hunt in a very short time frame. And folks, I I not only found a job, but I found a job in a place that we have been wanting to live pretty much our entire marriage. And I never thought I would ever be able to get a job here. Right now, we live in one of the most beautiful places in the country, in my humble opinion. And the first time my family and I visited, we fell in love immediately. And we've come here on vacation so many times. And there have been a couple of times we talked about, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could live here? And I thought, no, there's no way. There's no way we could ever live here. There's no way I would ever get a job here. Well, folks, sure enough, I just started applying for jobs in Qatar. And I got an email actually out of the blue. This was not something I had applied for. This was something that someone had reached out to me about. And they said, hey, I have this position. It looks like you'd be a great fit. Are you interested? And I said, sure. And I had a phone interview with the recruiter. And the recruiter set up an interview with the man who would eventually be my boss. Now, keep in mind, I'm halfway around the world. I'm working 12-hour days. I have to go through this interview over the phone. And for me, it was about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And I thought I tanked it. I thought, that's it. I'm not getting this job. I'm not going to be able to work there. And I was very surprised and very happy when I was given an offer. So while it was really stressful having to job hunt again, this time having to job hunt from halfway around the world, and having such a short time frame where I had to line up another job, God didn't just get me a job. He didn't just take care of me. He didn't just fix things. He got me a job in a place that my family and I had been wanting to live for decades, really. And after so many times coming up here for vacation and so many theoreticals, wouldn't it be great if we could live here? Now we do. And sometimes rejection is protection. And folks, sometimes things don't work out on one thing because God has got something better for us in store. And sometimes we go through a bit of a rough spot because that's how we get to something wonderful that God has lined up for us. Our Heavenly Father is always looking out for our best interests. I had mentioned in the previous episode that sometimes God stops the rain, right? Sometimes He prevents those storms from happening. Sometimes He allows them to occur. Sometimes He allows us to go through those storms. And ladies and gentlemen, going through that storm might be a form of protection. It might seem like we're going through something rough, but it could be that God is protecting us from something much worse down the line. And conversely, when we're going through something rough, when we're going through a storm, it could be because God's got something wonderful planned for us on the other side, and we've got to go through that rough spot to get there. If I had stayed in my job in Florida, ladies and gentlemen, I never would have gotten my job where I am now. My family and I would never be able to live in our dream location. By taking that job in Qatar, even though it was stressful, even though I was told, oh, in 3 months, yeah, we don't have a contract anymore. Even though I had to job hunt from halfway around the world, and even though I had to do these interviews over the phone at 9 o'clock at night after working 12 hours during the day, I got a job in a place that my family and I have wanted to live for so long. The job with Amazon, that would have been, at least at the time, I thought that would have been such a great opportunity. And I was really down when it didn't work out. I thought it was just going to be my job. But then I found out that Amazon had lost the contract. So, folks, again, sometimes rejection is protection. Sometimes we go through rough periods because God is actually saving us from something far worse down the road. When I got laid off from GE, that was a punch in the gut. And I mean, I can't even describe it. God was saving me from a company that was literally falling apart. Over the next couple of years, it just disintegrated. And folks, sometimes when we go through that rough spot, God is actually saving us from something far worse. And sometimes we go through a bit of a rough spot because that's how we get to something wonderful that God has in store for us. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're going through a rough spot right now, and it could be job issues, it could be financial issues, it could be family issues. If you're going through that rough spot, please lean into God. Bring it to God. Trust Him and know that He has got something wonderful in store for you. Bring it to God and trust Him and know that He has your best interests at heart and that He will get you through whatever storm you are facing and you will get to the sunlight on the other side. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And may God bless each and every one of you.